Hey everybody, it's Kristin from Magoosh here. Welcome to another episode of Tuesday CT. And today we are going to be talking about how to get a perfect score on the ACT. Now, that's way too much for a short little internet video to actually cover, but I hate clickbait as much as you do, so I promise you I'm actually going to give you some valuable advice here about how you can potentially achieve this lofty dream you have of getting a perfect ACT score. All right, tip number one is to take as many practice tests as you can. Now, that might sound obvious, but the ACT, far more than the SAT, really rewards students who put in the hard work. It's very repetitive, the questions are very repetitive, and the answer choices, or the reasons for the correct answer choices, are very repetitive as well too. So that means you want to have as much exposure as possible. I'm talking a dozen or more practice tests, and all the official tests that you can get your hands on. So you have the 5 official tests that are in the ACT Real Guide, 3rd edition. You have another PDF test you can get off the website. You have practice questions on the ACT website. You can practice with high quality test prep sources, materials like Magoosh, and you can also see if you can get from your tutor, if you're working with one, or another friend who's taken the ACT, if they've ordered the test information release. That means that they have a copy of a previous test, which is awesome, and you can practice with that as well too. So take as many practice tests as you possibly can. These questions will repeat over and over again, but there are occasionally some oddball question types that may take a while for you to find or to cycle through the test. And the more exposure you have, the more you're going to be aware of all these repetitive questions and know what to do on them when you see them on your test that you're trying to get a perfect score on. Tip number 2 is remember that you don't have to get every question right for a perfect score. This is really nice because with the ACT, when you're talking about a composite score, a composite perfect score of 36, that means you can actually get a 36 on a couple sections and a 35 on another couple sections and still get a 36 because that 35.5 is going to round up. Or you could get a 36 on 3 sections and get a 34 on another section, on the 4th section, and still get a perfect score. So what does this mean? How can you use this to your advantage? Well, first of all, it means that you shouldn't get hung up if you don't know how to do a question and you're really struggling on one. Don't waste time, eliminate answer choices, take your best guess, then come back to it if you have time at the end, but you don't want to sabotage your quest for a perfect score by getting really hung up on thinking that you need to get every question right. It also means that if you are focusing on getting a perfect score, you really need to pay careful attention to your strengths. Now, likely if you are targeting a perfect score, you're pretty strong across the board, but you're probably maybe more comfortable in English than science, for example. That means you need to be really, really careful that you don't get lazy on the English section, that you are really making sure you're practicing all your best test strategies, that you're reading everything carefully, that you're not getting overconfident and just going through and answering questions and making a silly mistake. If you want to get a perfect score on the test, you need to make sure that you are perfect in the sections that are your strongest so it can make up potentially for a very, very slight weakness in another section that's not your natural strength. And tip number 3 that is absolutely crucial, not just for a perfect score, but for the highest scores on the ACT, is to practice understanding the test from the test maker's perspective. Now this means really thinking carefully about what they are expecting you to do as a test taker. So if you are shooting for a perfect score, probably when you're taking practice tests and you're scoring in the upper 30s, you don't want to just go back to your practice test and just check the answers you got wrong, because there's probably not going to be many of them. There's going to be a handful of questions and you're not going to learn as much as you can. So what I recommend is that you go back and go through every single question. That might be too much to do on every single practice test you're taking, but particularly on some of your more important ones or early on, go through and study every question. Look at how they are constructing their answer choices. Look at what they're expecting you to do and where they're expecting you to get potentially tripped up. Now, the ACT for the most part is going to expect expect you to go about things in the school way. So for example, on math, that might mean they're going to expect you to go through solving this long word problem, and maybe along the way you're going to add something instead of subtract something, and then you're going to get really frustrated when you see you made that silly mistake. So you want to think about how you can be smart about the questions, how you can use answer choices to give you information that's going to help you solve the questions, how you could potentially back solve, use the answer choices to solve a math question, or substitute in numbers in a word problem to make it simpler for yourself. So going back and really studying the test, even the questions that you got right, is going to help you see it from a test maker's perspective, and you're going to be much less likely to get tripped up on questions. Okay, so 3 rules for your quest for a perfect score on the ACT is to take as many practice tests as you can, 12, 15, 20, as many as you can. Remember that you don't have to be absolutely perfect, so make sure that you are emphasizing your strengths just as much when you're taking the test and when you are studying, and make sure you're absolutely perfect in your strongest sections to maybe make up for a slight weakness elsewhere. And 3, really get inside the test maker's head, understand how they are constructing questions. Again, and I promise you the ACT is so repetitive, and this is something we know as tutors. It's something we study as tutors. We see it, we see how they're making these questions, and we can predict what the answer is going to be. And that's something that you only get good at when you study the test from that perspective. And then finally, I just want to remind you that getting a perfect score, this quest of yours, is pretty admirable, but it's also a really, really rare achievement and requires a great deal of luck. The stars really just need to perfectly align on that test administration and give you the questions that you are best at, and you need to be completely on your game and not tired at all, because you can't make any, well, you can make maybe a couple mistakes, but you can't make many mistakes at all if you're shooting for a perfect score. So don't beat yourself up over it. Getting a high score on the ACT, getting a 35, really, as far as admissions goes, the same thing as a 36. So don't kill yourself over this mystical goal of the 36. Only about 1,400 students out of the 1.8 million students in last year's graduating class got a perfect score. So, and those students were really helped out by some luck, I think. So there's nothing really separating a student that gets a 35 from a student that gets a 36 other than, again, luck. So just want to make sure that you get that message as well too, because if you're on this quest for the perfect score, probably you're being a little bit hard on yourself in that quest, and I want to make sure that you're not. All right, so that is another episode of Tuesday CT. If you want more tips for how to get the best score you possibly can on the ACT, you can check out this link, act.magoosh.com.